I can't remember the last time there was this much big time action in the first 2 weekends of college football
Mm.
as what we've seen these last 2 weeks. I mean, last week it was Notre Dame and Ohio State was the big one that we were focused on, but you had Florida and Utah. You had um, Oregon, Georgia. There was like a lot of good games on last weekend. Even some of the
Yeah.
games that necessarily weren't sexy. You had the backyard brawl in the opening weekend. You know, I mean, there's a game. Purdue, Penn State played a really good game that was big for both teams in the opening weekend. And then you move into week 2, and you've got some more marquee matchups with a lot on the line. And so we're going to preview those 4 games today. We're going to talk Alabama, as I said earlier. We're going to talk Alabama and Texas. We're going to talk a little bit about Florida and Kentucky. We're going to talk a little bit about Tennessee Pitt. We're going to talk a little bit about Baylor BYU. And I have a feeling Sean may want to talk a little bit about Stanford and USC. So so we'll get into. I did let people know at the beginning, Sean, before you joined, that was your upset pick of the week.
Yeah.
Stanford against Stanford over USC. So we shall see. So Sean, let's begin by talking about this Alabama-Texas game. This is a fascinating game, and it's an opportunity for Alabama to continue building on their resume as they push for another championship. And it's an opportunity for Texas to say, "Hey, look, we're here. You know, we're back. You know, and we're ready." And I think Texas can achieve that, in my opinion, Sean, in 2 different ways. Number 1 is obviously the most obvious, is winning. And number 2, I think if they can just play them like they did LSU 2 years ago, I think that's going to be a competitive, that could make it a more competitive game.
Yeah.
But I'm just not there yet, Sean, with Texas. And for me, it's really just about Quinn Ewers. In 2009 or 2019 against LSU, they had Sam Erlinger. Now, Sam is not nearly as talented as Quinn Ewers as a thrower of the football, but he was a veteran and he was a gamer. And he just was a kid that was going to battle for 60 minutes. And he was in his 3rd year of games in which he had started. Second year as a full-time starter. 3rd year in which he had started games. This is start number 2 for Quinn Ewers, who didn't play football last year. He was on a scout team at Ohio State. I just can't get there yet, combined with the young O-line and the defense that's still evolving. I just can't get there yet. So I actually predicted this not to be a competitive game, Sean. I went 44 Alabama, Texas 17. We'll dive into a little bit more here as how the matchup goes. But why don't you go ahead and give your prediction for this game before we kind of get a little bit more into the particulars?
I'm trying to remember, what was it?
42-24 was yours.
42-24.
Mm-hmm.
I think the receivers, Sarkisian, this is where you're going to get into like what Notre Dame fans would have wanted to see last week out of Tommy Rees in the offense. I think you will see that from Texas. I think Texas early, they will be aggressive. They will come with some trick plays. They will understand, because of Sarkisian's time with the Saban staff, how they operate. They might even know some of their checks and some of their calls and what they'll go to in this formation when you motion this way. But unfortunately, they have to play 60 minutes. And with the talent that Alabama has, eventually guys like Will Anderson and Bryce Young are going to take over and start to dominate the game. One of the things that I will point out, though, and this has been something that has hampered Nick Saban and given him trouble and probably some sleepless nights over the last season and a half. Last week, they only had 5 pressures from the defensive line.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a problem putting pressure on the quarterback last year with that defensive line, even though they had Will Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
So early on, Texas might be able to make some hay. I mean, they do have Bijan Robinson. I mean,
I would argue that they have two of the 3 or 4 most explosive athletes in this game.
Yeah.
Bijan, obviously, but then Xavier Worthy is a dude.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's, and you said it in your breakdown. Like, look, they're going to have their moments. Right?
Yeah.
Sark is going to get them. My question is, can Quinn Ewers hit those throws, and can they protect him?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that you're saying is you think there's a chance that they protect them, but I just don't know if they can do it for 60 minutes.
No.
I'll say this: if Quinn Ewers comes out playing well, This will be a good game because I do think that the Alabama secondary is vulnerable to top pass catchers, as most teams are, right? Yeah. Xavier Worthy can get open on anybody if you give him if you give the quarterback time. Just he can. He's big time. It's just, can you protect it? It's like the Ohio State game. There was 2 times Notre Dame had a guy open by 3-4 yards against the Buckeyes. But you couldn't protect him long enough to get the ball down the field.
Yeah.
And that's, that's what makes you a good team, is your coverage doesn't have to be great every time because quarterback's not going to have time. And that's going to be the question, because, with Dallas Turner and Will Anderson, as you mentioned, those are dudes coming off the edge. Yeah. Can Texas protect it? That's going to be the question mark for me.
You just mentioned it. That is the problem, right? I think they're starting, if I'm not mistaken, a redshirt freshman and a true freshman at tackle. That's scary. That's a scary proposition. You talking about Will Anderson and Dallas Turner licking their chops? They're definitely licking their chops. Redshirt freshman and a freshman starting at tackle. And I think they're starting some like 3 freshmen in total.
Right.
On the offensive line. Yo.
They didn't impress me against Louisiana Monroe either, honestly. I mean, they just out-talented them. I mean, there was things that you're like, there was a play, they threw like a little quick look screen, and a guy made like 3 guys miss. And you're like, that's not happening against Bama, right? And that's where you talk about projection, right? I mean, they scored this many points and all that, and that 52 points. Yeah, but you got to project it. Does that happen against an Alabama secondary? I don't think it does. And there was a couple other plays like that where Monroe had blown assignments, and you're like, that's just not things that Bama do. Bama will do. You have to earn it. When Georgia beat Bama in the title game last year, they earned that win. Texas A&M earned their win over Bama last year. Bama doesn't piss many games away, Sean. You got to outplay them and beat them. And I just don't know, especially Bryce Young now in year 2 as a starter. I just don't know if Texas has enough firepower. Because look, here's the thing we said about Xavier Worthy. Well, guess who else knows that? The smartest defensive football coach in college football, him and Kirby are, to me, in that conversation, right, with Nick Saban. Guess what the game plan is going to be? We're not letting that dude beat us.
No.
Somebody else is going to have to beat us. And, and that's where it comes down to comes all the way back to Quinn Ewers. Does he have the ability to do it? Because I don't know if they can open up the running room for Bijan early. They're going to have to get Bijan going in the pass game early. And I think that's going to be a key. Is if you can hit some plays there, I think Bama can have some success against Alabama running the ball. You're not going to run it down their throat all game. You're just not. You're going to have to get some plays in the perimeter. You're going to have to get a little creative with Bijan. And I think that Sark can do that. We've seen him do it before. We did it with Najee. Back in 2020. He was really good at finding different ways to get him to football. Those are the things that are going to be very interesting for me, Sean, is can Sark – I guess here's the thing, and you talking about at the beginning, whose experience against the other has the biggest impact? Is it Sark's knowledge of Bama? Or is it Bama's knowledge of Sark? That's going to be very interesting in this contest. And so I'm really curious to see how that goes, and I want a good game. I do. I want this to be a great game because Texas, Alabama, it's 2 traditional powers, 2 historic programs. I always like when those things are good games. I'm just on paper, I just have a hard time seeing it. And
something else you have to point out, last year they played a lot of youngsters on the defensive side of the ball. And they competed. But they just wore down. They wore down towards the ends of games. They gave games away late in the third quarter.
Sean, if they won every game they were leading in the fourth quarter, they're like 9-3 last year.
Yeah.
And, hey, we've seen Pete Kwiatkowski against this Alabama offense before.
Yeah.
A little different version of it. He was the defensive coordinator at Washington in 2016 when they played in the playoff and held them to 17 offensive points. Bama scored 24, but 7 of them came on an interception return for a touchdown. Now, again, he had some dudes back then, but I like Pete Kwiatkowski. I think he's a good defensive coordinator, and I think that was a good hire by Sark. But as you said, they're still really young. And is game 2 of their second year the time that goes off when, they're playing against Bryce Young? I'll say this, though. Watching Alabama's receivers last week, they're good, but this is not what Bama has had in the past. They're still very good. The standard is Bama's past teams, not everybody else. They are not the kind of – this isn't a Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Jalen Waddle group, Devontae Smith group. This isn't Devontae Smith, John Mechie. This isn't Jamison Williams, John Mechie.
Yeah.
That is going to be an interesting aspect to this, is that right there. And I didn't love Alabama's offensive line last week against Utah State. Did you see that one play that Bryce made where he kind of like made 3 guys miss and then oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like if Bryce Young starts doing that regularly, come on, that's not fair.
Right.
That's not fair. But I just didn't see the same kind of separation that you'd expect to see against a team like Utah State. They just were so much better than them.
Yeah.
So that is a question too, is Bama as good as they looked in the opener, as good as everybody says, or are they still slowly kind of coming back down to earth? I think this game is going to be a good test because they're going to be up for it.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is we don't see Bama play games like this very often. Like a true road game against a non-conference opponent. Like somebody was like, Bama's record against non-conference opponents is such and such. And I'm like, when's the last time Alabama #1 played a true road game?
True road game.
Right? Or played anybody good. It's like Virginia Tech and Louisville and Duke and, teams like that. So this is going to be a good test, and we're going to find out a lot about both teams. And then, if Texas somehow can pull off the upset, you're talking about sending shockwaves through college football.
Yo, that would be like Ty Detmer beating Miami, right?
Yep. Oh, big time. And all of a sudden, like you got Arch and you just beat Alabama.
Yeah.
Get ready to watch Texas roll to the #1 class in the country. I'm serious. Yeah. So and if I'm A&M, I'm like, we're about to lose some commits because they're about to flip to Texas. Because
that's definitely a possibility. And then you have one of the best storylines that you thought would be there. That's not there. And that's the tight end that transferred from Alabama out of Chicago, Jaleel Billingsley, who was suspended for the first 6 games for undisclosed team violation. So, that's a pass catcher, and it would have been a great storyline to see how impactful he would have been offensively. Another weapon for Quinn Ewers and Sark, but he's not even there. So, when you're going up against Alabama, you need all of your weapons available, man. Everything that you got in your arsenal, you need it available. And I'm just not sure that they have enough to go the full 60 minutes blow for blow with Bryce Young at Alabama. He's so darn good, man. I'm sorry.
He is.
He's so darn good.
You're like, how much better can he really be? And then you watch the first game like, oh, okay, I got it. Now, here's the interesting thing is, so you do not have Alabama covering, correct?
No.
I do, but that's going to be the interesting thing too is if Texas can keep it close, that's going to be interesting. What does that do for them? Because this is what you and I said in the offseason. If Texas can keep this game close and gain some because I do think Texas in year 2 of Sark of overcoming a bad team is in moral victory territory. Notre Dame shouldn't be because they've been a 10-plus win. I know that's a new coach, but they've been a 10-plus win team the last 5 years.
Right.
You're not in moral victory territory. Sark replaced a coach who got fired because they weren't winning. And so they are still in moral victory territory where if this team can have that competitive 60-minute loss where you're like, hey, guys, we got some stuff to clean up, where those young players that you were talking about, Sean, kind of like, hey, you know what we are? Because look, Quinn Ewers is a redshirt freshman. Xavier Worthy's a true sophomore. They've got a lot of young kids, much like Notre Dame. If they can get some sort of confidence from this game of, hey, you know what? We took Alabama to toe-to-toe for 60 minutes. Watch out for the rest of our opponents. And that's where Texas could get really interesting this year because the Big 12 is there to be had. There's a lot of teams down from where they were a year ago, in my opinion. Like Baylor lost a ton. Oklahoma lost a ton. You look at Oklahoma State. Yeah, their offense. Oklahoma State looked like a vintage Oklahoma State team, which isn't necessarily a compliment.
Their defense didn't look the same, though.
That's what I'm saying. It's not necessarily a compliment to look like a vintage Oklahoma State football team because they couldn't stop Central Michigan offensively.
No.
And so it's like, oh, okay, well, they're missing Jim Knowles a ton. So, there's that opportunity here, in my opinion, for for Texas to kind of come out and battle and say, hey, look, if you can get some momentum coming out of this game, this is a team that you're going to watch out for. But in the end, I still just think it's too early in Sark's tenure. He's got too many holes he's still trying to fix on the roster. And in the culture, that's the other thing. He's still trying to teach his team how to win.
Yeah.
And so I do like how impressively they won score-wise last week because they didn't win the opener last year in overly impressive fashion. in my opinion. And then, of course, went out and got blasted by Arkansas in week 2, but, of course, they played a good team in the opener last year, Louisville Lafayette, but
Yeah, you think?
we'll see. We'll see. I just like this Texas team for the future. I just don't know if game 2 of year 2 is the game we see them kick the door down, Sean. That's my thing. And as you said, if they had Blake Sims a quarterback, I think Alabama may be more vulnerable.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is just a kid that just he just has the same effect. It's like even when he was acting hyped up on Saturday after some big plays, it's like he was doing the jumping into guys thing, but you looked at his face, it was like still the same. It didn't change. Dude is just he's really impressive, especially for a young kid.